Okay, good evening, folks. Welcome once again. I am Franny Brewer, the Communications Director for the Big Island Invasive Species Committee. I want to thank you for joining us here for another Hawaii Invasive Species Awareness Month event as we spend this time together learning more about invasive species and what is being done in our state to mitigate the impacts of them on our environment, economy, and health. I'd like to start by introducing my BISC support team here tonight that's going to guide us smoothly through. We have Kavehi with us here on Zoom. Say hi, Kavehi.
Aloha.
And she will be monitoring the chat and the Q&A and handling our tech. And on Facebook Live, we have Jade. Say hi, Jade.
Hey.
And she's going to be taking care of the discussion over there on Facebook Live, which hopefully Facebook should be joining us right about now. Thank you, guys. And while we're doing this little introduction, Kavehi's going to launch a poll for those on Zoom. So if you're over on Facebook land, if you could just type into the discussion what island you're from, so Jade can record that. But if you're on Zoom, if you wouldn't mind filling out that little poll, that would be great. Okay, so I also want to thank tonight the HISC, the Hawaii Invasive Species Council, for sponsoring this important event. We've been working really hard all month to bring a series of webinars to you, and lots of our partners across the islands. You can head to the link in the chat for the full schedule of HISAM events that happened this month. There's a few more coming up. This is actually the final week of HISAM. It's very full. We have 2 webinars tomorrow beginning at 9 a.m. The Nature Conservancy is going to be presenting on the risk to Hawaii from firewood being imported to Hawaii. Yes, that is a thing that's happening. At 2 in the afternoon, you can learn about the history and the restoration efforts on the island of Kaho'olawe. And on Thursday, we will be back with you here at BISC to take you deeper on one of the topics we're going to touch on tonight, the impact of Toxoplasmosis on endangered monk seals. That's going to be a lunchtime talk at 12:30. So pack your sandwich and settle in with us for your lunch. If you can't make it to any of these scheduled talks or you missed some of the previous ones, don't worry. All of them are being recorded and the recordings are available on the HISC YouTube page. The link is going into the chat right now. And tonight's webinar is also being recorded. And any of the webinars that we at BISC have hosted this month or for HISAM last year can be found on our YouTube, and yet another link going into the chat for you there. Okay. So for those of you on Facebook, again, you can just head over to our YouTube if you want to catch any of those. Jade, if you want to put those links on Facebook. Tonight's topic for a long time has been really controversial: cats. Cats are identified as one of the 100 worst invasive species in the world by the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, but they are also one of the world's most popular pets, second only to dogs. And I have personally worked in conservation in Hawaii for 15 years, but I have 2 of the furry little tyrants, and a number of our panelists do as well. So there's actually a lot of room for wildlife and love of pets. I think I speak for all of us here on Zoom tonight that we're all animal lovers. But when you have a situation where you have a beloved domestic animal let loose onto a landscape in which it doesn't naturally occur, that's an invasive species, and it's causing damage, deciding how to address that problem brings with it a lot of tension and controversy. I might be slightly understating it when I say that such disagreements can get heated. But if we take a breath and step back, we can all clearly see that this is a problem resulting from human behavior and in a lot of ways, human irresponsibility. Cats continue to fly out into the landscapes of Hawaii every year. It's bad news for all wildlife, but it's also bad news for that unhoused, unwanted cat. We may be coming from different areas of Kuleana, but we do have a common ground: stopping that flow of cats. That's the issue that our panelists have been grappling with over the last year. We have Kirsten Leung and Angela Amlin here from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association, as well as Chelsea Bryson and Stephanie Kendrick from Hawaiian Humane Society. They are here tonight representing a larger working group of animal welfare and conservation professionals who came together to find and focus on that common ground. So before I introduce our first panelist, I really want to thank everyone who is attending for their interest in this topic. And I also want to ask that you listen with an open mind. Our panelists are here to talk about their unique kuleana that intersects with cats on the landscape. But really, they're here to focus as a group on shared goals and strategies to address that source problem. This is not a discussion about the pros and cons of TNR or euthanasia or disposition of feral cats in any way. And to respect all our guests, we will not be passing questions on to them about those topics. We do invite you to contribute questions, thoughts, feedback about the topics that are presented here and the work that this group has set out to do. And Jaden Kavehi will be following the Q&A and chat and Facebook stream to take those questions and pass them on to the panelists, which we're going to do at the end after all of the speakers have had a chance to present. Just go ahead when you're thinking of it, type it in there, and our team is going to keep track of those for you. So, turning off the tap. That is the title of tonight's webinar. And I took that from some communications shared with me by our first speaker, Kirsten Leung, who is a social scientist for the Pacific Islands Fisheries Science Center for NOAA. She has worked on human dimensions issues on federal lands and waters for over 15 years and applies social science to better understand and manage natural resource controversies over perceptions of resources or management, especially human-wildlife interactions and human impacts on resources. Much of her research has focused on animals perceived to be different from societal expectations, including suburban wildlife and outdoor cats. Kirsten, thank you for being here with us tonight. I'm going to start with the question, how many cats are you sharing space with this evening?
Right now we actually have two. We had one up until a couple weeks ago, and a stray cat actually showed up in our yard, and he's in the house now, and he's adjusted. He decided we're his people, but the other cat is a little wary still. So we're working on that, but they're starting to get along better. So, yep.
I know you've been worried about the new stepbrother moving in and seeing
Yes.
them here. So I'm glad to hear it's going well.
Yes.
I know that tonight you're going deeper into this topic of getting to that tap, that source, and you have some great slides prepared for us. So you can start screen sharing whenever you're ready.
All right, great. Well, thanks. Let me see if I can get this working here. Is that up for you all now? You seeing my slides okay?
Looks good.
Yep.
Yes? Okay, cool. All right. Well, thanks again, Franny, for inviting me to be part of this panel. Thanks for everyone for joining us this evening. As Franny said, my name is Kirsten Leung. I'm a social scientist with NOAA Fisheries in Honolulu. And you might wonder why a fisheries social scientist is focused on outdoor cat management, aside from the fact that I have cats. But the link is actually through Toxoplasmosis, which is one of the leading threats to the endangered Hawaiian monk seal. And as you'll hear later this evening, cats are the definitive host for Toxoplasmosis, meaning that cats are the only way that the disease organism is able to reproduce and therefore persist in the environment. So while NOAA's main concern is Toxoplasmosis, shed in the feces of outdoor cats, we know that outdoor cat management has been part of a broader conservation conflict for decades. And so my talk today is about the ways we're trying to flip the script about cat management to identify productive collaborations and the work that we've been doing with the Hawaiian Humane Society. Let's see, there we go. So I wanted to just start by acknowledging how this work came together. It actually started with a paper that I published with Ashley Gramza and Chris Lepchek that recognized the role of what are called conflicting cultural models or frames of reference that people use when thinking about cats and as drivers of conflict. And so that's what I'll illustrate a little bit more in the rest of the talk. Just for some additional reference, Ashley is a social scientist with the Playa Lakes joint venture, and she's finishing her PhD on outdoor cat management through Colorado State University. And she's also a member of the DC Cat Count team, which is a multi-stakeholder group working together on ways to accurately count outdoor populations in the Washington, DC area, and then bringing that actually out here to Hawaii through Oahu and also Maui soon. And then Chris Lepchek is a professor of wildlife biology at Auburn University, but he was previously at University of Hawaii at Manoa and had a graduate student who focused on outdoor cat management for her master's thesis. And then, so that paper came out in 2020, and Jenny Duberstein, who's a wildlife biologist and conservation social scientist for the Sonoran joint venture which is a partnership in the southwestern United States and northwestern Mexico for bird conservation, she reached out to Ashley soon after our paper came out because she'd been grappling with a situation that might be familiar to some of you. And so I just thought this was kind of a fun way to set the scene. She recently had noticed a small black cat with 2 playful kittens in her backyard. She was able to trap the kittens and bring them to the local animal shelter, but the mother cat was wary of the trap, and regardless, the only option offered by the animal shelter was TNR, trap, neuter, return, where the feral or unowned and unsocialized cats are captured, neutered, and then released back into the outdoors. So Jenny didn't want to bring the cat back to her yard, but none of the private shelters in the area accepted adult cats that are relatively healthy and feral, so she really didn't have any other options. And this is a situation that's becoming more common across the United States as shelters are shifting their strategies to really focus on the cats that really need their care the most versus the ones that are doing relatively well on their own. So Jenny, Ashley, and I have been starting to meet regularly to think about ways we could move sort of the concepts from our conservation biology paper towards practical actions. And that's when I started getting more involved with the 2 groups that you'll hear more from today. And I think we've really started to think about how we can take this from, again, theory to practice. So the first is the Toxoplasmosis and at-large cat working group, which includes members of federal, state, and local conservation agencies in Hawaii. And the second is the Hawaiian Humane Society on Oahu, who you'll hear from today, and as well as the other humane societies on other islands, but we've really been working most closely with the Hawaiian Humane Society. So just some important background from social science background to get us all on the same page. This comes from the study of animals and society, which is called anthrozoology. And the cover of this book by psychologist Hal Herzog really serves as a great heuristic for thinking about our relationship to animals. And what it shows through these images is that essentially societies create rules which can be codified into laws or just social norms that guide what we think about as the normal way to interact with a species. So some we love, like the dog, some we hate, like the rat, some we eat, like the pig. So it's these different species that we intrinsically know how we're supposed to be interacting with them, or what is sort of the right way to interact with them for the most part. But also, psychologists have pointed out there can really be different rules for the same species in different contexts. And so we have different ways that we understand the right way to interact with those animals in different contexts. But when animals aren't in the expected societal context, there can be conflict as those rules or norms are created. And that's what I was looking at for my dissertation work based on some seminal work done in England in the 60s on animal symbolism. And they found that when animals were clearly pets or clearly wild, at either end of this spectrum, they were very highly valued. For those that were sort of in the middle, that were more ambiguous or in between nature and culture, there could be different rules depending on the context. And so the example that was given here, again, this was England in the 60s, was, rabbits. There are rules for dealing with rabbits as pests when they're eating your garden, but there are other rules about how you interact with them if they're game that you're hunting them, rules of sport. And so again, that context tells you what rules to follow, and the value is subject to those rules. And so I saw this in my dissertation work on urban deer, where deer were expected to be, they were highly valued as wild animals at that end of the spectrum when they were in nature. But when they came into people's backyards and they started acting tame and they crossed this sort of imaginary threshold between nature and culture, people didn't know how they were supposed to think about them because clear rules were not really yet agreed upon. So people were drawing from all different kinds of their own personal values. And so that's what we started to see in our conservation biology paper, how there's a similar process playing out for outdoor cats, but moving from the other end of the spectrum, from tame or domesticated to wild. And that's what I'll illustrate next. So when we think about the core frame of reference for cats, unlike deer, they've had a really long history of a commensal relationship with people. And we can even see that in the archaeological record, dating back to 1350 BC in Egypt. And in this other image that went viral of cats walking on a medieval Italian manuscript, sort of showing that cats have been walking on important documents since forever. And now they even have their own corner of the internet with memes that started with Icon has cheeseburger and now include sites like lolcats. So at least in the US, we see these societal expectations for cats really starting with this grounding as a domestic animal and a pet. But how do people think about cats when they're living on their own outdoors? What is an outdoor cat? From a conservation biology perspective, there's obviously concern about predation of outdoor cats on native wildlife, as well as disease threats like toxoplasmosis that I mentioned earlier. And at the same time, people are taking care of feral cats on private property. So this is a photo of a sign from the Hilton Waikoloa Village on the Big Island, and also on city and county land, even where feeding is prohibited. So this is the infamous colony at the Hawaiʻi Park and Ride on Oahu. And so these different approaches for managing outdoor cats isn't unique to Hawaii. It's common across the continental United States and in other countries as well. And this is what has led to sort of the problem that Franny was kind of introducing us to, this idea that there are too many outdoor cats. And so we do see agreement that there are too many cats, that there's a population problem. But what to do about that is a little bit trickier. And so we can think about this by using the analogy of a flood. So water in itself isn't necessarily a bad thing, just like cats as a species are not inherently bad. But when there are too many in the wrong place is when it becomes a problem that we need to deal with. The challenge is that not everyone uses the same standards for determining what constitutes too many or in the wrong place. And so, you know, through our interviews and focus groups in the conservation biology paper, we realized that a lot of what this comes down to is that wildlife professionals were drawing on what's called a cultural model of an invasive species when they were thinking about outdoor cats. So when they saw a cat, that was sort of the frame of reference that they thought about. This is an invasive species. We're here in Invasive Species Month, right? And so since there are already guidelines for how to manage invasive species, outdoor cat management becomes a familiar problem that can be addressed with familiar tools. And one of those core tools is humane dispatch. But for cat welfare professionals, outdoor cats were really talked about and seen as homeless pets. And so, of course, this is what's led to promoting trap, neuter, return as a core acceptable tool. And you can see that from these different frames of reference, dispatch, no matter how humane, wouldn't really be seen as an acceptable tool to address homelessness. And so this different framing of the problem is what's led to these decades of conflict, with both sides really trying to convince each other to see outdoor cats through their own cultural model and accept their preferred management tool. And this really hasn't been productive. So we wanted to kind of throw out this model and think about a different way of looking at the problem. So when we think about a flood, both a mop and a sponge have a role in removing water. But we realize this isn't actually the full system. This view of the model misses the source of new cats, which is what's keeping it an open system. So as long as new cats are being added to the system, either intentionally abandoned or accidentally, like when pets run away, neither humane dispatch nor TNR can be fully successful, and you'll never end with either of those. And neither of those are really desirable as an ongoing process. And further, we realized that pet owners are really the ones who ultimately will determine social success at turning off the tap and stopping the leaks. So rather than trying to change each other's value systems when thinking about outdoor cats, we saw this as an opportunity for wildlife conservation and cat welfare professionals to work together on a coordinated message to reach pet owners. So as I mentioned, we had conducted a number of interviews as part of the conservation biology paper. That's how I started to get to know Steph and others with the Humane Society in the animal welfare community. And so we've been building off of those dialogues to build relationships. And that's how we started our little subset of the people from the Toxoplasmosis Working Group and the Hawaiian Humane Society who've begun working together on this, the source of cats. And so as we have been discussing what our collaboration looked like, we realized there was general agreement that successfully keeping those pet cats in the pipes, so to speak, or off the landscape is what we had as a shared need that would also kind of really rely on collectively helping to shape the way that society values cats as pets. And we actually identified two key sources of new cats, those free roaming pet cats and intentionally abandoned pets. But we realized there were a number of strategies that could help with both situations, namely sterilization, and then also activities that can help address cat behavioral needs that might lead to cats running away or owners getting frustrated with cats and wanting to abandon them. And so that can include ways that we give cats controlled access to the outdoors, so like catios or leashes or things like that. We also recognize that for owners considering abandonment, there are probably additional considerations. For example, here in Hawaii, we have a lot of temporary communities, students, military, people who are here for short term. And so we also have issues with not very much rental housing that allows cats. And so those were kinds of things that we thought were bigger than what our small group could address, but we have had fun brainstorming ideas like a pet library. But we have talked about things like promoting fostering as ways that we could maybe address the desire of some of these populations to have pet cats, but not for the whole life of those cats. So I should note that these are all things that both sides already promote, but we haven't really been doing it yet in a coordinated way. And one thing that we know from the science of science communication is that really to be effective for behavior change, messages need to be consistent and ubiquitous. And so if we can work together so that the average cat owner or prospective cat owner is getting the same messages from the wildlife conservation and cat welfare communities, we will collectively have a better chance at turning off the tap and stopping the leaks. And so now we're starting to work together on a social marketing campaign to address those topics. We're just getting started. So hopefully you'll be hearing more from us soon on that topic. But the exciting thing is that, another exciting thing, I guess I should say, is that we thought, it was already really ambitious enough to just focus on those collaborations targeting pet owners. But because we've learned to really trust each other and work together, we've also been able to think a little bit more about some potential collaborations for existing outdoor cats. And even just in starting this dialogue, we've learned a lot about even the different kinds of cats that are out there. So from the Hawaiian Humane Society perspective, that they're typically more concerned with cats associated with human communities. And there's a lot of nuance in those cats. There's a lot of different kinds of situations that those cats are in with different stakeholders and different strategies within that category that need to be taken into account. And at the other end of the spectrum, the wildlife conservation organizations that are part of that Toxoplasmosis working group know more about the cats that clearly fall within their jurisdiction, not on private lands, but on public lands typically, and more at the feral end of the spectrum. So we learned that these are also the ones that are sort of more on the periphery of the Hawaiian Humane Society radar, but yet they're the focus for the conservation community. So that was a really interesting aha moment for us as well. We know that the most challenging areas probably going to be the cats on public lands that interface with human communities, especially if there are colonies that are located in those areas. And these tend to be the places that people want to start first because they feel like they're the most pressing. But we felt like sort of taking a step back and getting clarity about the whole range of management contexts might be easier to help us understand each other's perspectives. And so we're hoping that we can start to develop a toolkit that helps understand each other's roles and responsibilities in that full spectrum of various management contexts, and really getting away from trying to have a one-size-fits-all approach, but really recognizing that each of those contexts are really different. And we need to really be really clear about what are the goals, who has jurisdiction, who are the stakeholders that are there, before we sort of latch on a specific management strategy in that context. So as we think back to our depiction of that broader system, I wanted to point out some of the key things that really have made these discussions possible. I think the first is that even acknowledging that there's a place somewhere in the broader toolbox for each other's core strategy was really important. I think that was one of the first things that Steph and I kind of starting the conversation was that we had to get out was we're going to come into this not trying to take those off the table. We don't know where the place is and when, but we're going to leave space for that down the line. And then by committing to work together on areas where we have this shared interest, moving the needle on how broader society views pet cat management and their pet owner responsibilities, we actually opened up the possibility for broader dialogues on things that we weren't expecting to be able to talk about as quickly. And this became possible when we made it clear to each other that we're really interested in learning from each other rather than trying to convert each other. So you'll hear more about the specific problems that each of the Hawaiian Humane Society and TACT working groups, specifically NOAA Fisheries, are trying to solve in their specific ways. But I wanted to leave you with that. And that's all I have for the core presentation. But I did want to bring you back to that update on the cat in Jenny's yard, which I just thought was kind of a great parallel story, that she was eventually able to trap the cat and have her spayed. She did have to bring the cat back to her yard, but she's been working on socializing the cat, starting with feeding it outside. And then the cat has started to come inside to eat. It has a name, Dusty. She's still wary. I haven't gotten a new update since then, but I know that she's been making progress. And so like our collaborations, it just seemed like a nice parallel to show that we haven't solved everything, but we're making progress in the right direction. So that's it for me. I will stop sharing my screen now.
That's such a great metaphor, Kirsten. I love it.
I thought it was just a fun story. So
little kitten steps.
exactly.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing that with us and for really, I think, framing the work that we're trying to share with folks here tonight. So that was really great. And now I'd really like to introduce some of the folks you actually mentioned in your talk. Our team from Hawaiian Humane Society, who we've had the pleasure of working with over the last year, addressing this source problem as you presented it so well. And they're here to give us some information about how Hawaiian Humane has tried to address the free roaming cat issue on Oahu and some of the needs and goals that they have moving forward, including cat count, which I'm very excited to hear more about that from Chelsea. So Chelsea is with us. She coordinates the free roaming cat program at Hawaiian Humane, but she comes from a marine science background and also works in oceanographic research consulting. She's going to talk about that shared goal, the cat count. And I'd also like to introduce Stephanie Kendrick is the Director of Community Engagement at Hawaiian Humane, and she has worked in animal welfare for a little over 5 years following a 25-year career in local print journalism. She's being driven by the goal of creating a more compassionate community for people and animals. So I'm going to just turn it over to you guys because I don't know the order that you want to share in.
Thanks, Franny. This is Steph. I'll start. Really appreciate the opportunity to be part of HiSam and to be with all of you today and speaking to this audience. I just wanted to offer a little bit of background before Chelsea gets into talking about the nitty-gritty of our program and our approach. I did, when I came on board at Hawaiian Humane a little over 5 years ago, it became clear, I don't know, maybe within the first few hours of being in the position, that this was a huge topic and was going to consume a lot of time and energy. And I'm a collaborative person by nature. So my first reaction to that was, we've got to get everybody together. And the feedback I got from everyone was, we've tried that and it doesn't work and we can't talk to each other. And every time we try and sit down around the table, it falls apart. And that was pretty discouraging for a while, but I'm not the kind of person who gives up easily. And then a couple of years ago, this miraculous woman appeared on the scene, Kirsten Leung, who wanted to take a look at this issue from a different perspective, which is, let's not try and sit down at the table and argue about the things we've been arguing about for years. Let's see if we can understand each other and where we're coming from. And that was really the game changer, I think, in the effort to collaborate, was finding people who we could actually have a conversation with, who were able to understand that we really do have a shared goal, which is fewer free roaming cats on the landscape. Hawaiian Humane has been dedicating resources to that for decades, largely through spay-neuter programs. So we want to be moving toward that goal. It's just been intractable in terms of trying to find a way to do that in concert with the conservation community. So I'm glad we found a different way to talk about things. I'm really grateful that we found partners who are willing to have that conversation. In the meantime, while we've all been fighting with each other, the national animal welfare movement has really altered its perception of free roaming cats and what's the best way to address that population. And as Kirsten mentioned briefly in her presentation, the idea that free roaming cats should even be brought into shelters is losing credibility around the country in animal welfare. The logic behind that is there are a lot of good solutions for them once they come into the shelter. And if they're doing well in the natural environment, they should simply be left alone. And there's quite a lot of pushback behind doing any sort of cat admissions into animal shelters because it's a high stress environment for them and can lead to bad outcomes, even if they come in healthy and friendly. And there's, you know, some kind of dogma building on that as sort of doing a pure TNRM or even just shelter neuter return approach to free roaming cat management. Not a lot of appreciation for some of the unique issues we have in Hawaii with our environment and our wildlife. So Hawaiian Humane has, obviously as a 140-year-old local nonprofit, we are very sensitive to our local conditions, local environment, local wildlife. And we've really striven to come up with a balanced approach that acknowledges the evolution and thought in animal welfare while also respecting local conditions and local concerns. So we, a year or so ago, stopped accepting healthy free roaming cats for the purposes of admissions. Now that follows decades of basically being willing to euthanize unfriendly cats that were brought in by the public and by agencies that wanted to remove cats from property. And we did that. We did that for decades. We gave them a humane death. We thought that that was close enough to our mission to be acceptable. And the reality is it took a terrible toll on our staff, and it obviously didn't solve the problem because we still have an island full of free roaming cats. So we have stepped away from providing that, from filling that role because it isn't consistent with our mission. And we've concentrated more resources into spay neuter so that the community can bring us free roaming cats. We will vaccinate them, we will spay and neuter them, we will give them a health check, we will microchip them, and we will expect that they'll be taken back to where they were found or to somewhere else where they're going to get care. So that's been the internal decision about how do we best use our limited resources as a nonprofit to address this problem in a way that is mission centric. And that has stopped including taking healthy cats in purely for the purposes of euthanasia because we can't find them homes. We are still, and again, this is no longer widely embraced nationally, but we are still enthusiastically accepting friendly cats that people find as stray and that we can find homes for. And we are accepting kittens that are healthy and we can foster and find homes for. So we have not adopted the position that a shelter is no place for a cat. We very much want to help cats who can be integrated into a home have that safe indoor home. We also, and this has come up briefly in the conversations we've had with our working group, are not opposed to the removal of cats from sensitive wildlife habitat, provided there's some plan for making sure that they don't just repopulate the same area. So we are enthusiastically in support of things like predator-proof fencing to keep animals out of sensitive wildlife habitat. And when those efforts involve removing cats from an area, Hawaiian Humane would be willing to be a partner in that effort. But what we can't really see as a long-term solution that's effective and humane is any kind of perpetual lethal control. It's not fair to the animals, it's not effective, it's incredibly expensive. And I think as intelligent human beings, we've got to come up with a way to do better. And then I'm going to turn that over to Chelsea so that she can tell you guys more about what we are doing on the ground, because there's some pretty exciting stuff going on.
Thank you, Steph, and thank you, Kristen. I think with both of your talks, that's a really good kind of setup and context. Let me just get over here. Does this look good? Can you see slides? Awesome. So I just wanted to give kind of a quick overview of the free roaming cat program at Hawaiian Humane. This is something that's actually still relatively young within the organization, at least in terms of its iteration right now. I'm going to keep it pretty brief, and then if there's pieces that are of interest, we can kind of tackle them in the Q&A after. So the kind of overall goal of the program, which I think has been echoed already today, is, and shared by many, is to reduce the population of Oahu's free-roaming cats humanely. It's really a three-pronged objective. This is for the betterment of the cats themselves, of course, but also for Oahu's community, minimizing nuisances caused by the cats, as well as for both terrestrial and marine wildlife on island. As others have said, this is a notoriously difficult issue to tackle, not just in Hawaii, although the lack of winter and dense population certainly don't get any easier, but for a variety of other reasons, largely around lack of education, lack of baseline science, and mistrust kind of between different groups. So I wanted to talk about a couple of the things we are excited about to try and break down some of these barriers. I'm not going to talk about TNR today, but I want to talk about the Oahu Cat Count, the partnerships that Kirsten already talked about, and then some just kind of responsible pet ownership initiatives as well. So the first one is the DC Cat Count. So this is a pilot cat counting project born out of a 3-year project in DC, where the aim was to get the first scientifically rigorous baseline estimate of free roaming cats within the district, as well as foster trust and collaboration across stakeholder groups in that process. So animal welfare and conservation biologists kind of teamed up and designed a kind of replicable cat counting method using transects, shelter analytics, household surveys, and camera traps. The idea was to be able to replicate their method. So as Kristen mentioned, Hawaii has become one of their implementation sites, along with Maui as well, so Maui and Oahu. The picture on the slide is just a screenshot of what some of our transects look like here in Honolulu. The map is just in ArcGIS. The transects are performed using a free ArcGIS field collection app for smartphones, and the methods are developed and followed from the DC Cat Count. Unfortunately, we were unable to include camera traps during this first go around, but as I will say in a moment, there's lots of potential for next steps. So our main objective here is to get an estimate and spatial analysis, basically a heat map of free roaming cats on the island, so that we have some kind of scientific baseline for basing management decisions. So as I said, there's a bunch of different areas to expand in the future here. This is kind of a preliminary survey, but it's meant to be iterative and performed at regular intervals. We have kind of a laundry list or maybe a wish list of things we would love to incorporate in future editions. Camera traps, like I said, would be huge. They would allow us to dig a little deeper into that unpopulated kind of cat areas that Kristen was talking about, kind of on the landscape where humans aren't kind of in settlements. And then it might also be an opportunity to work with different researchers, different groups, maybe graduate students. And then we'd like to really use the relationships with our partners here to develop priority areas based on their needs and conservation goals. So for example, around protected area or freshwater flows. And then of course, the more counting we can do, the better the data. And then aside from the Oahu Cat Count, we're also focusing on a number of measures geared toward making sure those pet cats don't end up on the landscape, namely through keeping cats inside and spay neuter. Some of those examples are catio competitions or working with our adoption partners, making sure we're fully utilizing that resource, especially with kittens, and making sure transient populations have the resources they need when they're moving to and from the island, whether that's helping with foster or just making sure that they surrender their pet kind of correctly. So I think what I think many of us have learned through this process and through this relationship is that no one organization or one team can really tackle this challenge alone. And it's through these partnerships that we can move the conversation forward. Similarly, no one management strategy will be the silver bullet. Like so many conservation issues or animal, human wildlife issues, we really need to use all the tools in the toolbox, all hands on deck So focusing on these shared goals like responsible pet ownership, spay neutering pet cats, keeping them indoors, as well as decreasing abandonment has been super, super beneficial. And I'm really excited to see where we can build on these conversations in the future. And I think I'm going to leave it here, but again, happy to kind of delve in deeper to any element of that.
Thank you so much, Chelsea. And again, like cat count is something that all of us have really gotten behind, over the years. I've heard estimates, just at least on the Big Island, of how many cats are out there. And it's everything from 20,000 to 600,000 to 1 million. I'm like, well, there's order of magnitudes differences here. So like, we should really get better numbers. So I really do hope that that is something that moves forward and we really support. Thank you so much. And Angela Amlin is our last presenter here. And Angela's gonna present some information on something that we're gonna go deeper into on Thursday. Again, at 12:30, we have that talk on exactly what she's here to talk about. She is the NOAA Hawaiian Monk Seal Recovery Coordinator, and she's gonna be speaking on toxoplasmosis in monk seals. So Angela, do you have any furry critters you're sharing space with tonight? We saw Steph's companion in the background there. I got mine locked out.
I have two, and one of whom seems to always know when I'm talking about cats, and so you might see her pop up into my video. The other one's probably sleeping, which is what she spends most of her time doing. So,
as we all wish we could.
I know, right?
So go ahead and you can share your screen. If you have slides prepared for us, you can share your screen whenever you're ready.
Okay.
And we're seeing that, and it
You
looks
guys can
good.
see?
Yep.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to talk about, as has been mentioned, toxoplasmosis, or as I will call it sometimes throughout the talk, toxo, and how this affects Hawaiian monk seals and conservation of this species here in Hawaii. And not knowing exactly what the range of folks who are tuning in, what your background is, I might be providing a little more background information than some people need, but just want to make sure that everyone's working from the same information. So really quickly, just what is the species we're talking about here? The Hawaiian monk seal is endemic to the Hawaiian archipelago. There are about 1,100 of them in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands or Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument, and about 300 to 350 in the populated main Hawaiian Islands, the largest monk seal population being on Ni'ihau and the smallest being on Hawaii Island, in the mains, that is. They are federally protected under the Endangered Species Act, where they are listed as endangered, and the Marine Mammal Protection Act, where they're listed as depleted, and they're also protected under state law, Hawaii Revised Statute 195D. So what is toxoplasmosis and how does it connect monk seals and cats? Although they're sharing a beach in this particular photo, cats and monk seals don't seem like they would actually overlap much, right? So I'm going to go through how monk seals are getting a disease from cats and what kind of impact it's having on the population. And then I'll come back around at the end to some of the joint messaging and efforts that Kirsten and Chelsea and Steph were talking about. So the life cycle here is a bit complicated, and I wish there was a way I could sort of skip over it, but I feel like it's really important to understand. So bear with me as I walk you quickly through it, and not getting into too much nitty gritty, but if you have questions in the end, I'm happy to answer them, or I will go into more detail this Thursday. So Toxoplasma gondii is a protozoal parasite that causes the disease toxoplasmosis. It reproduces sexually and creates millions of oocysts, which you can think of kind of like eggs. And the only place that it can do this is in the gut or the digestive system of a felid, which is a member of the family Felidae, or the cat family. They are what is known as Kirsten mentioned, the definitive host for the parasite, or the only host in which the parasite can successfully reproduce. These oocysts then enter the environment via cat feces. And in an ideal world, in the parasite's ideal world, common cat prey species, or what we would call intermediate hosts, like rodents or birds, ingest those oocysts, and then the parasite starts forming cysts. Apologies for the similarities in terminology, but this is different, what you more traditionally think of as a cyst, in their brain and muscle tissues. And it does this really kind of crazy and fascinating thing where it actually causes these prey species to lose their predator aversion, their fear of cats. And in many cases actually become attracted to the scent of cat urine. So they become easy targets for the cat to eat. And then the parasite finds its way back into the cat's gut where it can reproduce again. So this is a mutualistic relationship that benefits both the parasite and the cat. So at first glance, this looks like a nice closed system, right? So where's the problem? We're going to take a closer look at this part of the life cycle here. So when we're looking at this life cycle, the intermediate hosts are essentially just a mechanism for the parasite to return to the digestive system of a cat. The parasite does not produce oocysts when it's in an intermediate host, so there are no oocysts in their feces. Only in the feces of a cat that eats the infected prey item. The problem, if you will, happens when an animal that isn't a cat prey item ingests these oocysts, and we call them incidental hosts. And this can be any warm-blooded animal, which is a mammal or a bird. They can all get infected by this parasite. That includes people. Over 40 million people in the US are affected according to the Centers for Disease Control. But these incidental hosts are basically a dead end for the parasite, as cats don't eat these species, nor can these species shed oocysts in their feces. So the parasite settles in, starts replicating, and keeps forming these cysts. And that can mean any number of things for the infected animal. It could mean nothing. Many people, in fact, remain infected for much of their lives and never even know it. Or depending on the species, the environment, the virulence of the strength, the infectiveness of the strain, it can mean illness, it can mean pregnancy loss, or in the case of the Hawaiian monk seal, it can be deadly. Given Hawaii's topography and climate, species deposited pretty much anywhere on the landscape can wind up in the ocean, where monk seals either encounter the oocysts in those species directly in the water or consume them via contaminated prey. And I do want to come back to and be clear about the fact that none of this is to blame cats or make them out to be the bad guy. There are many diseases that co-evolve with a specific host species. It's just a function of the biology. It's important to cover this so that we understand correctly the dynamics of how this parasite enters the landscape and spreads infections so that we can properly address it and attempt to manage it. Okay, so now we know what toxo is and how monk seals get infected. So how is it impacting their population? It's considered one of the top 3 threats to the monk seals in the main Hawaiian Islands, along with fisheries interactions and intentional killing. Since 2001, there have been 15 documented deaths as a direct result of toxo. This number may sound quite small, but keep in mind that there are only about 300, 350 seals in the main Hawaiian Islands, and not all carcasses are found. We only recover, I think, just slightly less than half. Many wash out to sea or are eaten by sharks. Some are not in good enough condition to test. So that 15 is an underestimate. Additionally, we need to consider reproductive loss, which is the loss of the potential pups that a female would have had. So of those 15 deaths, 10 were female, and those are the seals you see on the screen in red. So this disease actually seems to be disproportionately affecting females, which is trouble in terms of losing that reproductive potential for a slow reproducing endangered species. One of those females was a first-time mom, so we don't know how many pups she could have gone on to have. You may have noticed that there are actually more than 15 seals on the screen. The red are females, as I mentioned, the blue are males. The yellow are suspected cases. We know that those 2 seals died of a protozoal infection, but we're not 100% certain that it's Toxoplasmosis, and therefore we do not include cases like those in the count. When we report or talk about cases, we only speak about deaths that are 100% attributable to Toxoplasmosis. Toxo has been very challenging to address for a variety of reasons that have been mentioned, and some that haven't yet. One being the fact that there are very large numbers of cats on the landscape, and we don't have great estimates of exactly how many or where the majority of them are. Franny talked about this. Past estimates for Oahu have ranged from 50,000 to 300,000, which is a huge difference. There are very few laws pertaining to cats, although that is starting to change. And most of the ones that do exist are at the county level. So there's a lack of statewide consistency, and there's little enforcement of a lot of these laws. For example, there's a steep fine for abandoning a cat, but it's incredibly difficult to actually catch someone in the act and enforce that law. As someone mentioned, our environment here is very conducive to cat population growth. There's warm weather, no large predators, and to spreading toxo. We have steep landscapes and lots of rain. I won't go further into this as I think it's been discussed, but there's a lot of disagreement over what types of management methods are appropriate and where. As Kirsten mentioned earlier, cats are not always viewed in the same way as dogs or other companion animals that are primarily kept inside, confined in pens, or kept on leashes. And there are some people that feel that cats should have unrestricted access to the outdoors. And then lastly, when it comes to dealing directly with the health of seals, it's very difficult to catch these infections early. And there are very few treatment options, none that have proven successful so far. We've only brought in 4 seals alive with the disease. 2 died within 48 hours, 1 survived 6 weeks, and 1 survived 10. And there are no preventative options. A vaccine doesn't yet exist for seals or people or cats for that matter, although a lot of work is being done. There we go. So how do we work on overcoming these challenges and others given the turn off the tap perspective? And I'm borrowing Kirsten's diagram here. So I want to reiterate that focusing on the tap doesn't mean ignoring the flood. It just means that we can build much stronger collaborative partnerships around addressing the source of new cats on the landscape, which is critical to the success of any effort to manage outdoor cat populations. And it's a way to build trust, build bridges, and hopefully reverse patterns of stalemate and start taking us in a direction where we see real progress. The other speakers tonight have covered a lot of this, so I'll just quickly run through a few ways in which this is happening. Working toward developing a common understanding of the scale of the issue. This includes the literal cat counting that Chelsea was talking about. Also understanding different perspectives of cats, understanding that we're not all speaking the same language. Kirsten mentioned that we're not thinking about outdoor cats in the same way, and we're not even necessarily using the same terminology in many cases. Socio-political enabling environment is sort of a fancy way for saying that you need public support and a political framework that enables this kind of work to be done. The political side of that looks like regulations, policies, and legal definitions around things like licensing, microchipping, what defines an owner, requiring and subsidizing spay-neuter. What are the different types of cats? Are there different types of lands where cats should be managed in certain ways, etc. As far as engagement, making information available to the public and talking about this issue, frankly, addressing what community members' concerns are. We've talked a lot about the perspective of wildlife biologists and cat welfare professionals tonight, but what are the needs of our communities and what are the barriers to taking action? So coming together and trying to come up with ways to provide these communities with solutions that remove those barriers and address those needs. I do agree with my fellow presenters that there's not a single solution that is likely to be effective across all islands, all ecosystems, or all communities. So we need to implement multiple management methods that are appropriate to the context. For example, to manage way up a seabird colony in the way that you are going to manage neighborhood strays. Lastly, on this slide, the theme here has been collaboration. But I want to underscore the need for parties involved to be committed to that collaboration because it won't always be easy. Disagreements will arise. So it's key to be intentional about staying at the table. And then just quickly before I wind up, I'm coming back to a few examples of simple things that people can do to address this issue that are good for both cats and for wildlife. As Kirsten mentioned, a lot of these we were already promoting at the same time that our partners at Hawaiian Humane were promoting, and some we're now coming together and sharing these. So keeping cats indoors, number 1 thing. This is good for wildlife. It's good for cats. Indoor cats live longer. They're at lower risk for illness and injury. Catios, enclosed lanais, and leashes. Yes, some cats will walk on leashes, are great ways to provide cats with controlled outdoor time. Disposing of cat litter in the garbage, not flushing it down in the toilets. Spay, neuter, of course. Finding pets a new home if someone finds themselves in the unfortunate position of no longer being able to provide and care for them as opposed to abandoning them. And then lastly, just because I have to do this as the monk seal recovery coordinator, asking people to please report sick or injured monk seals to our marine wildlife hotline. You can see the number there on the screen is 888-256-9840. And that enables us to respond as quickly as possible to try to attempt treatment in these kinds of unfortunate situations. And those are my girls that I mentioned, Momo and Lonnie. Lonnie being particularly, making me particularly ineffective at work by snuggling my mouse there. And with that, I will wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela, and thank you for sharing those images. I think Jade and I got really excited when you said Momo. For all the fans out there of Atla. That was great. I really appreciate everybody sharing their perspectives. And we do have some questions in the Q&A. Before we go to Facebook, I'll just sort of bring in some of these. One that's really interesting, Angela, since you're coming right off of toxoplasmosis, I'll hit you with these toxoplasmosis questions. Somebody asked about a vaccine, and I know there isn't one currently for humans, but do you know of any work going on vaccines for humans or for wildlife for toxoplasmosis?
There are actually there's quite a bit of work going on, some work being done in Germany and some work being done in Brazil. There is a vaccine that exists, but it's in New Zealand. It's a live vaccine. It's only for sheep. It's not approved for use anywhere else in any other animal. And especially in the US, we don't permit live vaccines. So as of right now, there's nothing current that can be used in any other species, but there is a lot of work that's going on and a lot of different approaches. Vaccines for parasites, for protozoans are much more difficult than they are for viruses. So it takes a lot longer to come up with.
Yeah, I can definitely imagine. There's also a question about whether, there's a question here about human health, which we can't really get into. Someone's mentioning, and I heard this, of course, when I was pregnant, about how they ask pregnant women to avoid kitty litter during their pregnancy so that they don't acquire toxoplasmosis, but we don't want to do human medical advice on here. But is there a test of feces that someone can use? And maybe somebody from Hawaiian Humane might know about this. Is there a way to test to know if a cat has toxoplasmosis?
So I can't shed too much light on this. That's not my expertise at all. But we did have some kind of very early conversations with a graduate student who was interested in doing exactly that. So I'm not 100% certain if that test currently exists. Angela might know, but I know that there's a lot of interest in doing research in that area, specifically within the context of free roaming cats.
There are some tests. Some of the challenges, certain types of tests only show exposure. It's not showing whether the infection is active at that particular time. It just shows whether or not the cat has been exposed at some point in its life. And then even if you can detect active shedding, it's not, because the parasite's not typically harming cats, there's not really anything that you would, that needs to be cured per se. And it also doesn't mean that they can't get it again. There's a bit of a piece of misinformation that's popular, that people say that they can only get infected once, they shed for 1 or 2 weeks, and then they're done. But literature going back to even the 70s has shown that they can get reinfected. They just tend to shed at much lower rates. Instead of shedding maybe like millions or billions, they're just shedding smaller amounts. So they can get reinfected.
Yeah, for just personal experience, for those asking about the impact, I am one of those people whose baby was affected by toxoplasmosis. I found out when my daughter was a little bit older, she has a toxoplasmosis scar on her optic nerve and she is half blind. So we didn't actually know that for years because she did perfectly fine with not having vision in one eye, but she only has peripheral vision in one eye, and that is something I did not realize. That I had worked in animal welfare several years myself, so I was exposed to lots and lots of cat poop, unfortunately. And so there can be impacts to children in the womb. So it is worth avoiding, it's a great excuse to have someone else do the cat litter, change the cat litter. And I guess, is that really a question? Let me go over to Jade and ask Jade, do you have questions on Facebook to share?
I have a couple.
it was about the cat count, because we talked about it being on just Oahu right now, but so is there any way to get that to the neighbor islands, like once this is completed?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We're doing this preliminary count on Oahu, hopefully building it out and continuing it every 1 to 3 years. Maui just secured actual funding to start their own count, so that we're in conversations with them and making sure we're linked up. I think it would be great if every island could do it, and I think linking our efforts and not kind of reinventing the wheel is great. We've learned a lot from this kind of first round that we're happy to share with Maui. But yeah, I mean, I think it would be fantastic to do on the island. I think DC Cat Count would be certainly interested in helping with that analysis and just figuring out kind of who can spearhead it on Big Island.
We've had also some preliminary conversations with lawmakers who are very passionate about this issue and supportive of the idea of doing a cat census so that we can have a baseline for where we're at. And so we're having just preliminary conversations with them about whether there's the potential for state funding to support these efforts, because so far, both on Oahu and Maui, they've been entirely nonprofit funded, so they're on a smaller scale.
Yeah, thank you. And then one more question, or actually a couple. Do you know about how much money it would need to get that count going?
So it's kind of that endless, the more the better, right? You can kind of work with whatever resources you have. We've done this completely kind of in our team and have a great group of volunteers. You could also do like a citizen science route. In terms of kind of just the software you need and getting up and running, it's fairly minimal, but if you want to make it kind of more large scale, more robust, I think you could really use external funding for that. So it's kind of, I mean, you can get started pretty minimally. And then if you want to bring in camera traps, for example, that's additional. If you want to get kind of a field technician hired to do the counts or the surveys instead of volunteers, that's additional. So it can kind of be created around the resources that you have, and depends on the goals that you have, right? Like if your goal is to understand a specific colony or a specific targeted area, it's a very different goal and a very different method than understanding kind of the landscape on an entire island or across the state, right? So can definitely be more targeted.
So it is possible to do that as a small scale thing, like maybe you only want to check these certain like areas versus like half the island or something like that.
Definitely. And if you go to I will drop the link in the chat in just a second. If you go to the DC Cat Count Hub, they have kind of getting started and methodologies and more in-depth kind of explanations about the transexum and different methods that they use. Because the idea is, they've developed this kind of tool and these methods, but for anyone to be able to kind of pick them up and do them at the scale and with the objectives that they want.
Okay, thank you. And I'll share that link on the Facebook chat in just a second. Another question is there any data on how many new cats that are like reproducing versus, I'm sorry, let me rephrase. How many new cats are just feral cats reproducing versus new cats that are released by people?
I don't think we have a numerical answer for that. I think anecdotally, we know that both sources are large, right? We know that abandonment is huge, just talking to colony caregivers. And again, anecdotally, we know that that's a really large problem, at least on this island. And by looking at kind of our shelter analytics, kind of cats that go through our spay neuter clinic versus cats that go through our shelter, we have a sense that there's definitely significant pools on either side, but at least to my knowledge, there aren't any kind of rigorous, robust estimates of either.
Yeah, thank you. That's, I think, all the questions from Facebook.
Great, thanks, Jade. And I want to just circle back when we were talking about toxoplasmosis and a test for feces. That was coming from Holly in our audience, who is starting a cat sanctuary on Oahu, modeled after the one on Lanai. And I just, and she's thinking of testing, to know what the cat's health is before she's bringing it into the sanctuary. And I just want to appreciate that, because that's certainly from conservation, having cats contained in a place that's safe and away from wildlife is really, it's so important. And that's something that, we really appreciate that work, Holly. So thank you for that. I think that's all of the questions. I do want to give a shout out to Parker, who is here tonight and is 7 years old and getting hopefully a good lesson in people with disagreeing viewpoints, still trying to come together to work on an issue where they can agree. And Parker wanted to know what the scientific name for a cat is. So I typed it into the Q&A to answer her, but if anyone can answer that really fast. Who can unmute and tell her what the scientific name of the cat? There it is. Was that you, Angela?
Yeah, Felix catus.
Felix catus. Great, wonderful. Okay. And then there was just a question about whether we could see the whether this is recorded. It is being recorded, and that should be up on our BISC YouTube in a couple of days. Kaveh or Jade, if you don't mind posting that YouTube link again in the chat so folks can have it. And I really just want to wrap up by saying thank you all for being here tonight. We really appreciate it. Again, we know there's a lot of disagreement, and some of that did show up in our chat discussion, but we do want to really step back and focus on that source. We can all agree that cat overpopulation is a tragedy in a lot of ways. It's something that we should be stopping. Cats belong with a family. They belong in a nice place with people caring about them. And I think that's a goal that all of us can agree on. So spay and neuter your pets. Spay and neuter your neighbors' pets. I have appointments made up for several people who are not doing the responsible thing. Myself, I'm getting those cats done. And really keep those cats indoors and take care of them. Thank you all to our speakers. Did anybody have any closing thoughts? Are we good? Okay, wonderful. With that, I will ask Kaveh to stop the recording, and I will wish all of you a wonderful evening. Thank you